could not hear you, I'm sorry. Hopefully. Good morning, Lakeview. Good morning. How is everyone doing today? It's warmed up a bit, the rain's come. Yeah. Good morning. We're going to be continuing our study of Exodus. We'll be covering basically the Ten Commandments today. We're halfway through the book. There's only 4 weeks left in this study, so we're going to be cruising through the last 3 weeks, but we're going to be spending time on the Ten Commandments today. So I'd like to start with a quote to set the stage. So, the laws are not about legalism. They are about holiness and holy living, both as command and guidance. They provide guidelines and boundaries on how any community that labels itself holy is to behave. Israel observes these laws faithfully, not to achieve holiness or to become holy, but because Israel is holy, thanks to God's good grace. So, we're on week 9. This is my bibliography. Again, my main commentary is the Exodus and Exegetical Commentary by Victor Hamilton. It's a really good, critical, but Bible-believing commentary. So if you really want to dive into Exodus, I'd recommend it. Our objective this week is to learn about the importance of the 10 words and to understand the difference between an apodictic and causatic law. So that's very important to what the 10 Commandments are. So we're going to start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to get to study your word, to get to understand your word better, Lord, and let it just fill our hearts, Lord. Let us understand what your 10 Commandments are about and how we can apply them in our lives, Lord. And just thank you so much. In your name, amen. All right. So, first off, let's try to figure out where Mount Sinai is. There are a dozen different proposals in Sinai alone of which mountain it is. We really don't know. The main candidate is known as Jebel Musa, which means Mount Moses. It lies in a cluster of mountains in the central southern Sinai. It has enjoyed traditional support as far back as the 4th century AD. There's a monastery there, I think called St. Catherine's Monastery. It was established by the mother of Emperor Constantine. The Ara plain to its north will be suitable for the Israelites to camp. It provides about 400 acres, though it lacks ready access to water. Jebel Serbal lies about 20 miles northwest of Jebel Musa, and it lies near an oasis and the main road through the region, though it has a much smaller camping area. So neither one of these are exactly perfect. And the further problem with them is they're both near Egyptian-controlled mines. If you don't know this, Sinai has copper mines that the Egyptians pay Semitic laborers to mine for them. If you've ever seen like early inscriptions of Proto-Semitic language, they come from these mines, and they're older than the Exodus story. There's also easy access to the sea and fishing. And the Israelites will later complain about missing fish in Numbers 11:5 while they've been camped at Sinai for a year. So that seems to be probably not these two mountains because they can just go fishing and they wouldn't be complaining about it. Another candidate is Jebel Sin Bishar, which is farther to the north. It's about 1,900 feet. There are fewer Egyptians in this area. There's no access to fishing. It also fits with the 11-day journey from Sinai to Kadesh Barnea, which is about 210 miles that we see in Deuteronomy 1-2. So one of those three is probably it, or it's another mountain. Some people might think it's a mountain in Saudi Arabia. I think it's called Jebel El Laz or something like that. If Dan was here, he would tell us. Again, here's the map. It only has Musa and Serbal. I'm not exactly sure where Sin, the third one, is. I think it's more up in this area. But that's where Sinai is. But as you can see, you have like the sea down here. So if they're in the plains, they can come down here to the sea to fish or send parties and stuff like that. So that's why probably a more northern central mountain is the location of Sinai. So, starting in chapter 19, after leaving Rephidim, that's where they fought the Amalekites? Or the Amorites? Amalekites, I think. They arrive at Sinai in the 3rd month after leaving Egypt. So this is late June to early July. They will not depart until the 20th day of the second month of the second year, Numbers 10:11 tells us. So that's nearly a full year they're going to spend at Mount Sinai. Everything that happens from Exodus 19:1 through Leviticus to Numbers 10:10 transpires here at Mount Sinai. They camp before Mount Sinai to enter into a covenant with God. The covenant does not make Israel into God's people. They are already his people, as we see in Exodus 3:7 and 3:10 and 5:1. The covenant is a more formal arrangement. It's more of a marriage, right? It's a binding, intimate relationship that lasts, as Hamilton puts it, until death do us part, right? So that's what's happening here at Sinai. So the covenantal relationship provides privileges like being God's treasured possession, 19:5, a calling to be a kingdom of priests, 19:6, and the character of a holy nation, also found in 19:6. That is what Israel is going to get out of it. Moses goes up the mountain to speak with God, who promises Israel will be a royalty of priests and a holy nation. Again, quoting verse 6 there. Moses tells the people what the Lord has commanded and how in 3 days the Lord will descend on Mount Sinai as a dense cloud. They will hear the voice of God speaking the 10 words. This is important when we get to the golden calf incident. They must wash all their clothes and abstain from sex for the next 3 days. God commands that no one, man or animal, can even touch the edge of the mountain. If so, they shall be stoned or shot with arrows. As this is a holy mountain, this is a holy site. You can't go up there if you're not prepared. On the 3rd day, the cloud descends with thunderclaps and lightning. The mountain shakes and smokes. Moses goes up with Aaron, the elders, and those chosen to perform priestly cultic activities. They're called priests, but this is before the official establishment of the priesthood. So it's more like they're just young men who are playing that role, but they're not officially priests. And that brings us to the 10 Commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods in my presence. So in my presence is a prohibition against pantheon, including a consort. God does not need other gods or a wife. That's the first thing God is trying to establish with them. They're coming from Egypt, has pantheons, has ruling gods that have consorts, right? The command is not saying that there are no other gods. There are other verses that do say this, but this is not what this commandment's about. Yahweh is saying he stands above any entities, whether they're created divine beings in rebellion to him, like Satan, or just invented by human fantasy, whatever category these gods are that are out in the world, right? There's a lot of different theories. Some people hold to them being actual divine beings in rebellion, others that they're just made up by humans. Whatever the case is, God stands above all that. The Lord calls for exclusive loyalty to himself. That's what the first commandment tells us. And that applies to us Christians just as much as it does to the Jews, or the Israelites, I'm sorry. You shall not make for yourself a sculpted image, nor any object like something in the heavens or sky above, or in the earth below, or in the subterranean waters. You shall neither pay them homage nor serve them, because I, the Lord your God, am a jealous deity, reckoning the ancestors' iniquity to the sons, to the thirdlings, and to the fourthlings of those who rejected me, but keeping faith even to the 1,000th generation of those who are loyal to me and keep my commandments. First off, this is not about art. Right? You can make art. The Israelites made art. Images in the ancient Near East were the focus of spells and rituals. Sometimes this was to compel the deity. Other times it was just to care for the deity. That is what images were used for, to localize the deity there so they can bargain with or command or cajole favor from their God. God does not need our care, and he will not be compelled by us. Right? This is why magic is always a sin in the Old Testament, because magic is trying to compel God to do something. So Proverbs 6:34 talks about a husband's jealousy sparking anger at his cheating wife. This is the sort of jealousy we should be thinking about when it talks about God being a jealous God. And Song of Solomon 8:6, speaking of the lover's love as strong as death, it's jealousy unyielding as the grave. Right? This is the sort of jealousy God has to us. He does not ignore, take lightly, or is indifferent to the bride he loves, cheating on him with an idol. right? Just like a husband should not take lightly, ignore, or be indifferent to his wife cheating on you, or a wife with her husband, right? That is why jealousy is used. Normally, it is a negative word. You're not supposed to be jealous of what other people have. You're not supposed to covet what other people have, right? But in this one case, this is a positive use of that word. You notice the translation used thirdlings instead of like third generation, fourth generation, like most translations do. That's just because that word is not actually found in the Hebrew. That's just translators trying to smooth the translation into English for us. But another way to think of this is it's a family unit, from the grandfather, who's the patriarch, to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Right? That was a family unit back then. And after that, families would tend to break apart into new clans, right, with new patriarchs coming out of those families to form new, larger families. That's just how the ancient world worked. But the point is, sin affects the whole family, especially in such tight communities, right? Not that the children are guilty of their parents' sin, but they are suffering the consequences of their parents' sin, right? Of abuse, of alcoholism, of all sorts of stuff, right? We all seen it. We all know it. Many of us have lived it, right? What that trauma can do to us, right? So that is why God is saying this. It's a warning. If you hate him or reject him, it's going to have consequences to your children and to your children's children. But if you keep loyal faith to him, you will be blessed down through the generations. If all your generations keep doing this, God will keep blessing you. And also notice the translation uses reject over hate, as most translations do, and keep faith over love, because these are actions, right? Rejecting is an action. Keeping faith is an action. They're not emotions. And this better conveys the intent of the Hebrew here. You shall not take the Lord your God's name frivolously or falsely. That's either how the word can go. For the Lord will not leave unpunished the one who takes his name frivolously, falsely. Text doesn't say how God's going to punish you if you do this, but frivolously or falsely seems to be what the Hebrew is getting at. Do not swear by Yahweh if you're lying. Do not use his name flippantly, right? Jesus talks about this, right? Don't swear by God. Just say your yes be yes and your no's be no. Right? You don't need to do that. Just be honest. Because if you're going to do it, God's not going to be happy with you if you're lying. This also isn't about cussing. Right? This isn't about swearing. We're not even sure if this concept of swearing or cussing even existed in the ancient world. This might be more something that came out of the sort of Enlightenment era, right, where upper class people didn't like how lower class people talked, and so they started saying their rough words were dirty and stuff like that. But the reason this is important is Israel bears God's covenantal name, and that's serious business, right? They're his people. They're holy because his name is in them. And this applies to Christians, right? 1 Peter 4:16. If you suffer as a Christian, do not be ashamed, but praise God that you bear that name. We bear God's name. We bear God's image. We have the Holy Spirit in us, right? These are the things that God has given us, and we should take that seriously as Christians. Hamilton writes, either honor my name, both by the way you live and by the way you talk, or else disassociate yourself from my name. That's what the third commandment is about, right? Don't be lukewarm here, hot or cold. Remember the Sabbath day to hallow it, to make it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. The seventh day, however, is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you and your son and your daughter, your male and female slave, and any draft animal, and the alien who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them. Then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it, made it holy. Sabbath is very important. It is mentioned more than any other commandment in the Torah. This reveals the commandments are not just do as I say, but do as I do. God rested after creation. God is not a workaholic. Don't be one either. Have any questions on these four before we move on to the next one? Yes, Dan.
Isn't there something about what we positively do on the Sabbath? Is this a time for thinking?
That is That is covered in other parts or a more developed belief. It's not really stated there in the commandment. I think it's developed in later parts of the Torah. But part of it is to remember what God did, but part of it is also to take a break from your labor and not overwork yourself and use that time to focus on God, not focus on your daily survival, right? I think that's the point. And also, Sunday is not Christian Sabbath. It's the Lord's Day. It's the 8th day, right? Okay. Christians are not bound to have the Sabbath. It's still a good idea for us to take rest. But we're going to get our ultimate rest when the second coming comes and we go to heaven, right? Any other comments on that? Okay. Well, the 5th word. Show respect to your father and mother so that your days may be long, so your days may long endure upon the land that the Lord your God is giving to you. So the first 4 commandments are about our relationship with God. And now we are shifting to Israel's relationship with each other. It's about community. Community starts with family. That is the building block of any community, which is one of the problems we're having because we've destroyed the family in our society. The covenant depends on parents passing on its requirements and meaning to their children. So children must respect their parents to be able to absorb that knowledge and be willing to receive it. The fabric of the society in the ancient world depends on this, and clearly our fabric of our society depended on it. Skills and knowledge are passed down from parent to children. You didn't send your kids off to school at this time. There weren't universities. There aren't trade academies, right? You taught your son how to do your job. You taught your daughter how to do your job. That's how knowledge was passed on. We see in Ephesians 6, 2-3, Paul writes, honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. God is saying, this community stuff is important, and this is what you're going to get with it. You're going to live long in the land. That means peace. That means stability. That means, you're not quarreling with anyone, right? That is what it is. And that's what, Paul's saying we need to apply that selves to our lives as Christians, right? We're not part of the law, but the commandments still have wisdom for us. Yeah.
No, a comment on this. The understanding of somebody whose mother or father is abusive or whatever, you kind of struggle with this. But it says honor. It doesn't say do exactly as what your parents did, there's other things to do. It just says they tried,
Yeah.
tried to do things, so give them honor. And it doesn't say, like other things, that you have to do exactly what they did.
Yeah.
Or follow through. So the word honor is important for us to understand, especially if we help people that struggle with this, that have relationships with parents that are
Yeah.
as good as we would.
It's not obey, it's respect.
Right.
Listen to. Listen to your parents. They got wisdom, maybe they don't. But yeah, it's not like obedience, but it is respect. It's listening to them, drawing on their knowledge. Maybe you'll agree, maybe you won't, but you're giving them that respect. And it also, of course, if you have a family that is not broken, this will be easier to do, right? That gets us back to you reject God, and your family's going to suffer. You shall not murder/kill. Which is the better translation? Murder or kill? That's been the debate for a long time. The Hebrew verb in question is rasha. It's one of the 4 chief verbs that refer to ending somebody's life. The other 3 are harag, mut, which in the hifl, which is one of the grammar styles, gets changed to himit. That's a more common way you'll see it. And katal. So some like to argue that rasha means murder, and the others just mean kill or slay. However, harag is used in Genesis 34, 25, and 26. And that's where Simon and Levi massacred an entire town in vengeance for what happened to Dinah. That's murder, right? And that's using, not rasha. And then we look at Numbers 35, 16 through 21. It uses rasha for murder there, right? This is the commandments about unlawful killing. And then it switches over to the manslaughter rules, and it still uses rasha for an accidental homicide, right? For, the head of my axe slipped and brained you and you died, and I didn't mean for that to happen, right? It still uses rasha. So it's not murder specifically. We can't just say this means murder. But here's the thing. The sixth commandment, it's a prohibition. You can only prohibit deliberate actions. You can't prohibit accidents. That's why they're accidents. So this is banning deliberate killing. So I think murder is a good translation for this word, because we'll see that there are lawful killings in the law, executions, someone breaks into your house, you have the right to defend yourself in the law. So there are lawful killings, also war, right? But this is deliberate killing, and that's what we're seeing here, things that harm society, right? Defending yourself from someone who's trying to harm you is not harming the society. That person is, right? You shall not commit adultery. And adultery in the Torah is only when a man lies with a married or betrothed woman. That's something we need to understand. That is what the Old Testament means with adultery. Yes, the Bible shows us clearly that the intention is for one man, one woman, forever through marriage. But the Torah is not a purely moral law. It's a practical law to make an ordered society for a world full of broken people. It's a world that has no social safety net for women, right? So this is where polygamy happens. Their property rights are based entirely on paternal bloodlines. So you need to know who the kid's father is to know what he's supposed to inherit. So casting doubt on paternity destroys the cohesion of society and causes the collapse of family. So this is not about sexual ethics or marital fidelity. There are other parts of the Old Testament that you can go to that. Proverbs, right? Song of Songs. Or we just see examples of how when marital fidelity is not maintained, things go badly, where polygamy leads to bad results. But the law is just trying to make the best of a broken world in a world where these practices are seen as normal, and to try to put safeguards around it as much as possible. All right. You have any questions or comments on that? Yes, Dan.
Where adultery was only, as you say in the first word, when a man has sexual intercourse with a woman who's married to someone else.
Yeah.
If a married man has a sexual relationship with a virgin, we would not call it by adultery, but we would call it sexual immorality, right?
Yes, it is sexual immorality. He will face consequences, either to pay the girl's dowry to the father, or to have to marry the girl himself and never be allowed to divorce her. That is something, but that's the law that's to come. We're talking here about the Ten Commandments. This is specifically what this is about, right? This is just laying groundwork, and there's going to be law that is going to build on all the commandments as we go through the Torah. But specifically, this is what adultery means, and this is what is being talked about specifically right here. But yes, there's, not to say that God wants you to do this. Again, Proverbs talks all about the problems of this sort of stuff, right? So, any other comments? Yeah.
I think I would just be more comfortable with what the last sentence say, so it's not simply about.
It's not simply about, okay. Yeah, I know we like it to be like perfect, but the law is, as Jesus says, is a compromise in some ways with the people and the culture. So it's not perfect. That's kind of the point of the law, right? It's not perfect. And that's why we have something better in Jesus. All right. You shall not steal. My commentary had nothing to add on this commandment. What is there to add? Don't steal, right? It's very straightforward. You shall not testify against your neighbor as a false witness. Do you know this is such a big deal in Hebrew that there are 6 different ways to say this? Like to say false witness? Because if you can't trust the legal system, your society collapses. So this is something God's like, no, we're not going to be doing this. Look at this. We have Ed Sah, Ed Sagar, Ed Hamas, Ed Hinam, Ed Belial, ed kazabin, right? These are all different ways to say don't be a false witness. That's how important this concept is, right? And this is where we go to like when Jesus says, like, just make your yes be yes, no be no. It's not necessarily lying, but it's lying that harms, right? That is what is getting at here, especially in official settings where real stakes are at place, right? Because bearing false witness means you're going to authorities and you're lying, right? This could cause someone to get financially harmed or executed. Today, that would be people get sent to prison because people bear false witness against them, right? This is a very serious matter. And the last one, you shall not covet your neighbor's household. It says house, usually most translations probably means like the members of the household. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife and his servant or maidservant, nor his ox and ass, indeed anything that belongs to your neighbor. So the first 9 prohibit certain activities or actions. This last one prohibits an inner thought or desire, right? All the other ones are actions. This is the desire. How does one punish people for what they're thinking? Obviously, humans can't do that. But really, it's not to punish you for what you're thinking. It's to stop you from thinking it, from even starting that, because an action begins with a thought, right? Coveting leads to actually doing something about it. And Jesus talks about this, right? You know, if you stare at a woman with lust, you're coveting your neighbor's wife, basically, and you're basically committing adultery already. You're already thinking about it. You're working yourself up to it. That's what this is about. And we have advice from Paul, right? To avoid capitulating to a spirit of covetousness is to follow Paul's counsel in Philippians 4:11 through 12. For I have learned to be contented, whatever the circumstances. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, because a contented spirit is the direct opposite of a covetous spirit, right? Everything that comes before all the previous 9 ones are all building to this. This is the one that really causes you to do all the other stuff, right? It's what you're thinking. It's what's in your heart that leads you to sin. So God's trying to nip that in the bud. All right. Do you have any comments before we get into even more technical stuff about covenant and laws? Yes?
I find it interesting that not to commit adultery because of property rights, etc. As a modern Hebrew, when you can have your own job as a woman, you can vote, have property rights, and inherit, how do they apply that to them today?
Well, the rabbis periodically sort of update all their laws and stuff to adapt to changing situations. I honestly don't know what current rabbinical thought is on this matter, but that's what they do. There's, they even have names of it. It happens every couple hundred years. There's some famous rabbi that'll come along and sort of update laws or ideas for them. But for us, adultery is any sexual relationship outside of marriage. That's how Christians need to be seeing it. That's what we're told specifically in the New Testament, right? But this is to the Israelites in the Old Testament. So the law could be a guide for us, but we got to understand that things have changed for us in some ways. We can't just use it as a blanket thing. We can't understand it how they did. I'm just trying to show you how the Israelites would have understood this and what it meant to them, 3,000 years ago. So, I told at the start we'd find out what an apodictic law is and what a caustic law is. I had never heard either of these terms before I started this study. So, apodictic laws are laws where you're told to do or not to do something. They are you shall or you shall not laws. These commands are absolutely certain and necessarily true. That is what makes it an apodictic law. A caustic law are laws that say if you do X, then Y will be the response. When you do X, you cause Y. That's a caustic law. That's most laws, actually, right? So that's the basic difference between an apodictic and causatic law, is that The former are sort of categorically imperatives of universal validity, and the others are situational. There is rarely a punishment given for breaking an apodictic law. Notice, there's not a single mention of punishment except for, if you reject God, God said this is what's going to happen. And then there's a promise of reward on the fourth command. But all the other ones, there's no talk about punishment on any of them. Just don't do it. We see this difference here with Exodus 20:15. It says, you shall not steal. And then we compare it with the caustic law about stealing in Exodus 22:1. Right? If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he must pay back 5 head of cattle for the ox and 4 for the sheep. Right? He did X, now he has to do Y. That's his punishment. That's a caustic law. Almost all scholars of ancient law codes agree that while apodictic laws do appear here and there in the ancient Near East legal corpus, they are not nearly as pervasive and prominent as they are in the Hebrew Bible. One who checks out other law codes, especially like the Code of Hammurabi, discovers that they are almost entirely composed of causitic laws, if-then laws, right? But all the 10 words are apodictic in nature, unlike the legal collections that we find in the ancient Near East. And we have found the law codes of Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Assyrians, I think the Egyptians too. And of course, again, the most famous one is the Code of Hammurabi. It dates to several hundred years earlier than Moses. And it consists primarily of causitic laws. They give what penalties to use on a wide range of offenses, but they do not talk about right or wrong or tell people what they should or should not do. Right? It's like our legal code. It doesn't really say what's right and wrong. It just says, if you do this, this is the consequence. And sometimes you're like, that's really dumb. That's my consequence, because that doesn't seem like a bad thing at all. But laws aren't really about that. They're about controlling behaviors and, creating a society that the government wants, right? So the type of laws found in the 10 words that prohibit or require certain types of behavior are apodictic laws, right, which are rarely found in these law codes. So that's what sets the 10 Commandments apart away from most of the rest of the law code of the Torah. There. Apodictic. This is important. So the absence of clearly stated sanctions from breaking an apodictic law suggests that the 10 words is not a criminal code at all. That will come next in Exodus. Right after this, we'll start seeing actual legal code. Where we see apodictic laws in the ancient Near East, they are in suzerain treaties as stipulations on how the junior partner is to act with the senior, more powerful partner. All right, have anyone ever heard the word suzerain before? Yeah, I didn't hear it until I started playing grand strategy games. But this indicates that the 10 words are the start of a suzerain treaty between God and Israel. So a suzerain is a more powerful king who promises to provide military security to a lesser nation in exchange for obedience, tribute, and military aid in times of war with other nations. So when Israel is running off to Egypt for help, they're making Egypt their suzerain. When they surrender to the Hittites, they're becoming suzerains. Like when Moab rebels against Israel during the divided kingdom part, well, Moab is the suzerain to Israel, and that's why Israel and Judah go to try to punish Moab, because they're breaking their suzerain treaty. So we find parallels with the 10 words and suzerain treaties of the ancient Near East. So this is what the 10 Commandments are. It's a suzerain treaty. It's the start of that. It is the relationship between God and Israel. So we have a lot in common, right? Like, don't have any other gods relates to don't have any other suzerain. Makes sense. You're basically an emperor. You don't want them serving other kings. Don't make any idols or images. Well, respect the image of the suzerain, right? You shall not use the God's name falsely or frivolously, right? We see this, the counterpart is do not speak evilly of the suzerain, and do not hold guiltless those who do. There is nothing like the Sabbath anywhere in the ancient Near East. The Sabbath is unique to God and Israel. Honor your father and mother, right? Give honor to the suzerain, right? So he'll keep you in the land, right? Do not murder. Well, don't murder the suzerain king's people. He doesn't really care if you murder your own people. He cares that you murder his people. Do not commit adultery. Well, don't seduce the suzerain king's wife. Do not steal. All right, don't take what belongs to the king. Notice how these are very specific to who you're really offending in the human suzerain treaties versus the one God makes. Right? Do not bear false witness. Don't swear falsely, because then you're violating an oath you made with the suzerain. And also, do not covet what belongs to the suzerain. Right? So, yes, Dan?
Were there times where the suzerain would impose a celebration on his people?
No.
To celebrate like
I'm not sure.
July or something like that?
Holy days are more about a God's religion. I think the only one I can think of there is Babylon had on the full moon was just like a day of rest. It's like the closest Sabbath comparison that we have in the ancient Near East, and it's just one day, and it's imposed by the king, and it's just on the 15th. But not that I know of. But anyways, this is how Ten Commandments relate to the wider world.
I'm sure when the Romans brought a victory celebration into the town,
Well,
the town was supposed to close down and work and join in the victory celebration.
Well, we're talking about 1,200 years before the Romans. So this is specifically, the suzerain treaty stuff, by the way, I should make this is at the time of the late Bronze Age that this is how things worked. And things would change as we head into the Iron Age. And so this is specifically a late Bronze Age thing. That's one of the things that's important, especially about these suzerain treaties that God makes. They're situated in the late Bronze Age, not the middle Bronze Age and not the early Iron Age. So that's one of the things we can say, like, yes, the Torah comes from this time period because it fits what we see of treaties in that time period. That's more of a Deuteronomy discussion than this one, but yeah. So again, do not think that the Torah is borrowing from the cultures, but that the Torah sits in this cultural stream of the late Bronze Age. And that expresses the covenant relationship between king and subjects in such fashion. So God is establishing the same relationship with Israel. So he's not just going to be their God, he's also their king. And this is why God gets mad when they run after other kings, because they're breaking their treaty with him. Also notice again how the 10 words differ from the suzerain treaty, since many of these commands have been expanded to apply to everybody, right? It's not just don't murder my subjects, it's don't murder anybody. Don't steal from anybody. It's much more universal than the suzerain treaties. As the founding treaty, the 10 words, like the rest of the Torah, is focused on instructing Israel on how to make an ordered society that reflects on the reputation God desires to have, which is a kingdom of priests that's similar but different from the surrounding cultures. They are to inform Israel on both how to interact with Yahweh and how to interact with one another. A covenantal community is the focus, highlighting by honoring parents, again, so that you may live long in the land your Lord, your God, is giving you. That's what the point of these commandments are, to make this ordered society, right? And it's one based off, loving your neighbors, frankly, right? Your neighbors, including the alien. They're not here to establish morality, but they are to characterize the way God's covenantal people can retain his favor and therefore receive life in the land. So God is establishing a community identity in the context of the cultural river, the ancient Near East, or the late Bronze Age, as he administers his favors, blessing in his presence. And if the treaty is violated, as we'll see in Deuteronomy, Israel will be subject to curses, abandonment, and ultimately exile, which is what happens to them. We can also see this in the relationship between gods and their worshipers in other cultures right there. We actually found this temple in Philadelphia to a shrine to the goddess Adista. And the builder lists commands he was given to Zeus in a dream. I thought these were really interesting. Look at this first one. Not to destroy a fetus or cause an abortion. At a pagan temple in Philadelphia. That's unusual for the Greeks. But not to commit a robbery, not to murder, not to steal anything, to be loyal to the sanctuary. No man will lie with a strange woman other than his wife, nor with any boy or maiden. That's actually a stronger one than the adultery one. Very interesting. Came to him in a dream from Zeus. So he claims. I don't know. But the inscription says that any who are guilty of such crimes, it's to prohibit anyone who does these things from entering the shrine. Because here sits enthroned mighty gods who keep an eye on all those who transgress and will not tolerate sinners. The gods will look with favor on those who obey and will grant them blessings, but will hate those who transgress and will inflict on them great punishments. This is very Old Testament stuff, yeah. This is 1st century BC. So this is Jewish influence on the Greek world that's happening here, is what I think this is. So I'm just saying, I think this is what we're seeing here. Did he have a dream from Zeus? I don't know. But it's interesting. I wanted to include it. Sorry. So to fully understand what God is doing with Israel, we must be aware of the similarities we find in other cultures so that the practices God is spurning will stand out and can be contrasted against the outside cultures. Like adultery that's the same in all of them. It's the great sin. Like every other culture around there thinks it very highly. Don't do it. So the 10 words are not connected to law, but to covenant. I've been calling it the 10 words because nowhere in the Old Testament is this collection actually referred to as the 10 Commandments. The Old Testament actually uses 10 words to describe this. Like in Exodus 34:28, we read, and Moses, wrote on the tablets the words of the covenant, the Aseret Habadbarim, which is 10 words. Most translations will use 10 commandments here, but the Hebrew does read 10 words. Also in Deuteronomy 4:13 and 10:4, right? Referring again to the 10 commandments, but the 10 words. So this is what Jews will call it. I think that's what we should call it, but the Septuagint translates the Hebrew phrase in 2 of these 3 references literally as decalogai, which comes our scholarly term for the 10 commandments, the Decalogue, which is just 10 words. Deuteronomy 4:13 uses decoramata, which I think is just from trying to look through a Greek dictionary, it just seems to mean word. It's another way of saying word. Yep, Dan agrees. All right, I got that right. My commentary didn't actually specify that. I was annoyed. So the Hebrew word dabar or dabarim is not normally the word for a commandment, and most commonly means word or words, right? The word for commandment in Hebrew is miswa, plural miswat. And it's used all over the place in Exodus, right? In all those verses, and look at how many times it's used in the Psalms. And it's miswat is commandments, right? The writer of Psalm 119 says when he speaks of the Lord's miswat, he's not thinking of only the 10 laws of Exodus, but the entire law. So the entire law are the commandments, but the specific, what we call the 10 commandments, are the 10 words. Of course, the 10 words are commands, so it's not necessarily a wrong way to describe them as commandments. I'm just being literal here. Psalm 119, 172 reads, may my tongue sing of your word, for all your commands are righteous. So God's words are his commands, and his commands are his words. Do you know we have the 10 words repeated in Deuteronomy 5? Commandments 1, 3, and 6 are reduced exactly the same. 7 and 10 have all added and on the beginning, so you shall not murder, and you shall not steal, all that, blah, blah, blah. The most significant difference is commandment 4 and 10. 4 has keep instead of remember. So you keep the Sabbath instead of remembering the Sabbath in Deuteronomy. And 10 adds neighbor's house and field to the list of things you shouldn't covet. This is just anticipating the coming conquest and settlement of Israel, so God just being even more specific. Remember, Deuteronomy 5 is addressed to the second generation of Israelites. If they were around when the first was given, they were little kids, right? So many of them did not grow up seeing Mount Sinai, seeing all this stuff. So it's just being reiterated to them before they go into the land. And why the Lord does not directly quote everything verbatim, sometimes God just doesn't do that, and we don't really know why. Maybe just for variety. Normally, when God gives commands, he speaks privately to Moses, who then communicates it with the people. But 21 opens with, and God spoke all these words, saying, it implies that the Israelites at the base of the mountain are hearing these things. Remember, there's a cloud on the mountain, there's thunder, there's lightning, there's probably a great booming voice speaking to them. The you in the 10 words is never plural or feminine, and all the verbs are masculine singular. So does this mean God is speaking only to Hebrew men? This is a critique, that it's only speaking to the Hebrew men. Chapter 19 indicates the Lord is speaking to the people, though, and not to the males. And to think that a masculine singular you includes only men is fallacious, because Exodus 23:19, right, uses the singular masculine you in you shall not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. Does this mean that only men cook in Israel? No. This is just a problem with the language, that it's a singular thing because it's being spoken to each individual person. That's why it's using a singular you. You are not to murder. You are not to covet your neighbor. That's what the point is. And it has to choose a masculine or feminine you to do that. So it's just a problem with English, or of Hebrew. So the legal section of Exodus is sandwiched between the two chapters which highlight the covenant. So chapter 19, God offers the covenant, and in chapter 24, Israel accepts it. So we see all the law code stuff sandwiched in between it because that's what's going to make it all work, right? For that reason, at least in Exodus and Deuteronomy, one cannot speak of covenant without law, nor can one speak of law without covenant. The purpose of law is to provide boundaries to the covenantal relationship that, if honored, will go a long way in perpetuating that relationship. What banks are to a river, law is to covenant. And the Old Testament roots the good life, the ethical life, in the Lord's created order, as well as the Sinaitic law. Right? Psalm 19, the heavens cry out your glory. Also, we have your instruction. It's both things. Hey, Matthew 22, 35 through 39, everyone knows this. Teacher, what is the greatest commandment? In the law, right? He's asking which one of the 10 words are the most important. Jesus says, doesn't even quote the 10 commandments. He quotes Deuteronomy 6:5, the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and with all your mind. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. First, Jesus changes prohibitive laws into performatives. You shall not to you shall, right? You need to do something active. It's not just refraining from do something now. It's you need to do something now. Second, he condenses the first 4 commandments into one and contracts the 6 remaining human word commandments into one. Because that's really what they all boil down to. You love your neighbor as yourself. You're not going to kill them. You're not going to steal from them. You're not going to sleep with his wife. You're not going to steal his stuff, right? You're not going to covet him, right? And you love the Lord your God with all your might. You're not going to have another God. You're not going to, speak his name falsely. You're not going to bow down to an image or even make an image of him to worship and try to compel. And also you honor his Sabbath. That's what Jesus is saying. And we're kind of out of time here. So how can anyone boast of loving God while simultaneously hating one's fellow human? That is what Jesus is telling us the law's point was, the 10 commandments are. So that's what we'll be covering next week, and we'll end with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time to study the 10 commandments and to understand their point, their purpose, and how we can apply them to our lives, Lord. To remember that we shall love our neighbors, that we are commanded to love them, not just to not hate them, but to love them, Lord. And let us always remember that, Lord. And let us keep that lesson in our hearts, Lord, and spread that message, because the more people who hold to that idea, the better society will be, Lord. Just thank you for all you do. In your name, amen.